Yo guys, welcome back to a brand new video. Today, we're going to talk about the Tal Rasha Meteor Build for Season 28 on the PTR. One thing I will say before we get started is that I don't think the Tal Rasha set is going to be changed in any way before we get up to the season. So this guide should remain relevant through the rest of the season, and I hope you enjoy. First off, we're going to go with the Tal Rasha's helm. You're going to want intelligence, crit chance, meteor damage. Also for this helm, you're going to want to put a topaz in it. This build doesn't benefit as much from cooldown reduction as it does from resource cost reduction. Okay, for the shoulders, we're going to go with Og Hills. You're going to want intelligence, vitality, or cooldown reduction, resource cost reduction, and area damage. I would encourage you to make sure that your rolls are better than mine. I'm kind of just testing this out on the PTR and just going with the right rolls, but they're not particularly optimized. For the amulet, we're going to go with squirts, and this is not correct. You do not want the attack speed, you actually want the cold damage percent. And of course, for all jewelry items, you're going to want the crit hit chance, crit hit damage, and your socket. Okay, for the gloves, we're going to go with Tal Rasha's Grasp. You're going to want the intelligence. You're going to either want attack speed if you're playing a speedrun build, or you're going to want area damage if you're pushing. Then of course, we want that crit hit damage and crit hit chance. Moving on to the chest, we're also going to be using Tal Rasha's here. These are going to be the stats that you want: intelligence, vitality, attack speed, and armor. I recommend socketing this with intelligence gems. However, if you're really struggling to stay alive, you could also go with strength or dexterity gems here for additional armor. Alright, moving on to the wrist, we're going to be using Og Hills. You're going to want the cold damage percent, the intelligence, the crit hit chance, and either life per hit or vitality, whichever one you find helps out more. For the belt, once again, we're doing Tal Rasha's here. You're going to want intelligence, vitality, life percent, and armor. Okay, for the rings, and this build is pretty difficult to get the right rings for, because you're going to need quadfectas. If you're doing speed runs, you're going to want attack speed, crit, and a socket. If you're pushing, you're going to want area damage instead of attack speed, and then crit, socket. The convention of elements is the same situation here. Attack speed if you're doing speed runs, area damage if you're pushing, and then of course crit socket. For the leg slot, we're going to go with Tal Rasha's. You're going to want intelligence, vitality, and armor. Okay, for the boots, we're going to go with Nilfers. You're going to want intelligence. You do not want all resistance. Ideally, you would rather have vitality here. You're going to want the armor, and you especially want the meteor damage. Bear in mind as well that the secondary ability that we have here can roll from 675 to 900. This is a huge range, so make sure that you're really focusing on getting a higher roll. It was really hard for me to ignore these boots, even though they do have the all resistance instead of vitality. We got 893 out of 900 on our increased damage multiplier. These boots are especially important when you're killing Rift Guardians because this only works when there are 3 or fewer enemies. Alright, for the weapon, we're going to go with the Grand Vizier. You absolutely want the 10% damage increase. You want the area damage. When it comes to the intelligence, you can either do that or go for resource cost reduction if you're struggling to keep arcane power up. Remember, in Season 28, we can use the primordial shards that we'll get from breaking down primal items. We can then use these to turn any item that we have into a primal ancient. We can only wear one, but I would definitely recommend putting it on your Grand Vizier. Okay, moving on to the cube, we're going to be using the Smoldering Core. This is fantastic. Not only does it give additional damage, but it's also going to make lesser enemies lured in to where you're casting the meteors. Most enemies that you're going to fight are lesser enemies, and so this is just phenomenal for grouping them up. Next up is the Mempo of Twilight. I wouldn't even recommend trying this build unless you have the Mempo in your cube. The Meteor Shower rune is absolutely great to have automatically applied, and a 400% damage multiplier on top of that. And of course, the Ring of Royal Grandeur. We are using 2 pieces of Og Hills and 5 pieces of Tal Rasha, so we certainly need a Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube. Okay, let's talk about the legendary gems. You are going to want Bane of the Powerful if you are doing speed runs. If you are trying to push, you're going to want to go with Bane of the Stricken. Regardless of whether you're pushing or doing speed runs, we absolutely want a Zay's Stone of Vengeance. And the same can be said for the Bane of the Trapped. You're just going to want to use that whether you're doing speeds or pushing. One thing that I'd like to add is that at the start of the season, just get enough ranks on Bane of the Powerful to make it last long enough. This gem doesn't really have to be that high of a rank. You're going to want to focus on leveling up your Zays and your Bane of the Trapped as a priority. And then your Bane of the Stricken does not need to be leveled up at the start of the season. You can level that up when you're getting ready to push for high GR tiers. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into the skills. First off, we're going to use Black Hole with Absolute Zero. This rune is absolutely incredible because each enemy that we hit with our Black Hole is going to give us an additional 3% cold damage for 10 seconds. So if you get enough enemies into this Black Hole, you're going to have a massive damage multiplier. Moving on to Meteor with Comet. This is our bread and butter. This is what we're going to be spamming the whole time. Okay, before we dive into the next skill, I want to talk about Tal Rasha's 6-piece set bonus. This requires us to do some amount of fire damage, cold, arcane, and lightning. This will get us up to 4 stacks, which is going to give us an additional 8,000% damage. If you're missing any element at all from your build, you are limiting how much you can benefit from this multiplier. And for that reason, I use Familiar with Sparkflint. This is the way that we're going to get fire damage into our build so that we can benefit from all 4 stacks on the Tal Rasha set. Teleport with Calamity is really important because this is a way that we can get the arcane damage onto the target. Once you teleport, you're casting a wave of force that's going to deal a minuscule amount of damage, but it is going to proc the Tal Rasha's set bonus for arcane. Next up is Storm Armor with Power of the Storm. This is how we're going to get lightning damage onto our enemies for the Tal Rasha's 6-piece bonus. This skill is absolutely essential to the Tal Rasha's build, so make sure if you're changing anything, I would highly recommend keeping this skill. It's a very easy way to apply lightning damage because it's just passive. You don't have to activate anything, so this will allow you to continue spamming meteors and not actually have to throw out some kind of lightning attack just to keep all 4 stacks up on Tal Rasha. Lastly, we're going to go with Magic Weapon and Deflection. This is a free 10% increase to our damage, and on top of that, we're also going to be gaining a shield. And that shield is going to help protect our Squirt's necklace so that we can actually do a lot more damage. And if we're getting hit, they won't necessarily break through that shield every time. Elemental Exposure is a pretty obvious choice for this build because we are using all 4 elements to damage our enemies, and so this is going to give us an additional 20% damage. Next up, we're going to take Audacity, and it might seem a little strange because you would think that you're mostly going to be playing at a really long range, and you can do that, but when you get up into the action, that's going to help you because it's going to allow your Storm Armor to hit an enemy and give you that massive damage reduction percent. Galvanizing Wand, also really important. This is going to keep us alive and protect our Squirt's necklace. And lastly, I really like to go with Illusionist for this build. This is going to allow us to just teleport more frequently, and we also gain an additional 30% move speed for 3 seconds after we teleport. Okay, for our follower, we're going to want to go with the Templar. The first thing that I'll note is that you absolutely need at a minimum 25,000 strength on your Templar. 25,000 strength is where these abilities cap that say based on the Templar's strength. And to give you all a quick look at the skills, we're going to go with Heal, Loyalty, Onslaught, and Guardian. Okay, for the Templar Relic, we're going to want to go with the one where your follower cannot die. We're going to take Homing Pads. This is just convenient when we're town portaling out of somewhere. We're not going to be interrupted. There's nothing particularly phenomenal for the shoulder slot, and so I find this one to be the best. The other option, of course, being the one that makes all of your items indestructible so that you don't have to pay repair costs. We're also going to be using the Leoric's Helm. This is the only follower in the game that actually benefits from cooldown reduction. So using this helm with a diamond there is going to give him 25% cooldown reduction based on Leoric's effect. Of course, we'll be using the Flavor of Time. Don't have to talk too much about this one. Everybody knows it. Nemesis Bracers, same thing. You use this on any follower. This is free elites. Similar to our build, the follower is also going to use the Tal Rasha's chest. This gives attack speed, which is absolutely great for the Templar. Just make sure that you re-roll this item on some kind of strength character like a Barbarian or a Crusader so that you can actually get the ability to roll off the intelligence and turn it into strength. Gloves of Worship are going to be phenomenal this season. Shrine effects last for 10 minutes. Our potions now give us a shrine or pylon effect. So you're going to get that effect for 10 minutes when it's a shrine. Alright, so for the belt slot, we're going to be using the Vigilante belt. This belt can roll cooldown reduction, which is fantastic for the Templar. We'll also be using the Captain Crimson set so that we can get that additional 20% cooldown reduction. Oculus Ring is an absolute essential for any follower, so make sure you get this. Mine only rolled at 77%. Ideally, you want to get one that's maxed out. This is the one item on your follower that is going to really improve the power of your character, so just make sure to get as high of a roll as you can. For the ring, I'm going with Unity. Although I'm not wearing a Unity and I'm not going to benefit from this, I happen to get one with cooldown and attack speed and strength, so it just seemed like a good choice. If you're doing T16 content, I would say that you should go for an Avarice Band over this unity. For the weapon, we're going to want to go with Thunder Fury. The proc on this is absolutely great because it's going to slow enemies down, which is going to activate our Bane of the Trapped. And our second piece of Captain Crimson's is going to be the boots. All that you really need is a high strength roll on this item. And lastly, we'll be going with the Wall of Man. This gives us 8% cooldown reduction. Again, great for the Templar. Okay, moving into the Paragon points, one thing that I would recommend is max out your movement speed and your arcane power first, and then start stacking vitality until you're up to about 1,000,000 health. This build is a bit squishy, and then beyond that, just go straight into intelligence for the rest of your points. For the offense tree, I would just recommend doing crit hit chance, crit hit damage, attack speed, and cooldown reduction probably last. Quite honestly, you could do these 3 in any direction that you'd like, whatever you feel is best for your character. For the defense tree, I would honestly recommend just going top to bottom. The life percentage is really good, the armor is really good, the resist all is okay because we get so much of it based on how much intelligence we have on our character, and the life regeneration is probably the least important. Alright, for the utility tree, I would recommend starting with resource cost reduction. We don't need the area damage yet because we're not going to be pushing until a little later, and so when you're in the first 800 Paragons, the area damage is not that important. So let's start here, then I would go for life per hit, then area damage, and finish it off with gold pickup radius. Quite honestly though, you could fill this out in any order you want. We're going to be getting to Paragon 800 so fast in this season because we're given so much power off of the Alter of Rites. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into some pros and cons and then just some general tips and tricks for this build. Starting with the pros, we've got crowd control immunity in the Alter of Rites this season. This build has always been so vulnerable to crowd controlling effects, and now we are immune to them. This is so much more beneficial to us than say like a demon hunter using Vengeance or a monk using Epiphany. When they have 100% uptime on these, they're never getting crowd control. So they benefit so much less than we do from that ability on the Alter of Rites. Next up for the pros is that we just do massive damage, and it's quite honestly really aesthetically pleasing. It just fills the screen and blows up everything. It looks really cool and it's fun to play. And lastly for the pros, this is probably the easiest build to play to clear a GR150 in Season 28. I believe that this build is going to be way better in Season 28 than it was in 27 because we never had an Angelic Crucible that worked perfectly with this. Although the 10 magic missiles was fine, it was nothing compared to like the Strafe Impale. The Fist of the Heavens Crucible and the Strafe Impale Crucible absolutely made new builds exist. We didn't necessarily need the magic missiles to ever make this build function, and now we've got incredible power from the Alter of Rites. On the PTR, we already have people clearing 150s with ease at about my Paragon level. For the cons, this build is pretty squishy. It is so easy to die. You're really reliant on your storm armor hitting things around you, and if it doesn't strike somebody and it falls off, you get an 80% damage reduction taken off of your character, and it makes you so vulnerable to getting killed in one hit. Remember, because we are using Halo of Carini, this is what's giving us that 80% damage reduction when that storm armor hits a nearby enemy. Every once in a while, if you're not close enough to enemies, that buff is going to fall off, and if you happen to jump into a new crowd of enemies while that damage reduction is not up, you are gonna die. Another con is there is kind of a lack of gear choices. There's not much flexibility with this build. It's really clear which gear pieces are the best, and there's not much in the way of theory crafting. And the last con is mostly just the delay on your meteor. You don't have an attack that's gonna instantly go off and do damage. However, I would say that the absolute massive damage of the meteor kind of makes up for that. The delay isn't too terrible either. It's about 2.5 seconds, maybe 2. For this build, I would absolutely say that the pros completely outweigh the cons. Alright, let's go ahead and just get into a few general tips for this build. If you're going to be doing speed runs, I would recommend getting at least 14% attack speed on your character. When you're pushing, you are absolutely more focused on getting area damage. Specifically, when you're pushing, you're going to want to have that area damage roll on your staff, your gloves, the shoulders, and both of your rings. And so you are stacking up so much area damage with this build when you are pushing, and it gets completely out of control. But for speed content, you don't necessarily need these area damage rolls because you're just going to be moving so fast through everything, and it's not going to matter that much. Another general tip that I'd just like to go over is that I don't feel like you need as much resource cost reduction when you're doing speeds. Because you're pretty much 1 or 2 shotting all the enemies, you're not really dealing with arcane power problems, and so take whatever you want in the gear slots over resource cost reduction because you should be just fine. All right, let's go ahead and dive into some runs. The first one that I'm going to show is a GR120 using my build, and the next one I'm going to show is a GR120 using the max roll build. The max roll build uses diamond skin, but I prefer using black hole whether I'm doing speeds or pushing. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate your time. Go ahead and drop a comment down below and let me know if you're going to play the Tal Rasha Meteor build this season. As always, I genuinely appreciate you for watching. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one.